Kurt, make her have a little tiny taste. She thinks it's medicine.
I know she does.
Because it comes from a spoon, right?
After 3 decades of silence, Frances Bean Cobain is finally opening up about the father she barely knew. The story behind Kurt's last photos with her, the secret letter he wrote before her birth, and the painful truth about growing up as rock's most famous orphan. Today, we're uncovering the raw, emotional story of a daughter trying to understand the father who left too soon. Kurt Cobain was born on February 20th, 1967, in a small town called Aberdeen, Washington. It was a tough place to grow up. The town was struggling because the timber industry was dying, and many people were out of work. Kurt's parents, Donald and Wendy, were really young when they had him. His dad was 21, and his mom was just 19. Life wasn't easy, but there was something special about Kurt right from the start. Music ran in his family. His uncle played in a band, and his great-uncle was a singer who had even been in a movie. Kurt also had a rare trait. He was left-handed, and that would later make his guitar playing stand out. He started showing signs of talent early. At 2 years old, he was singing, and by 4, he was already playing the piano and making up little songs. He loved music and had favorite artists like the Beatles and the Ramones. His first drum kit came when he was 7, and he spent hours banging on it. On his 14th birthday, he got his first guitar from his uncle. He didn't take lessons. He just figured it out himself. Within weeks, he could play songs like Back in Black by AC/DC. Kurt's life wasn't all about music, though. Things at home got bad when his parents divorced. He was only 9, and it hit him hard. He became quiet and angry. He even wrote on his bedroom wall how much he hated both his parents. From 1976 to 1982, he moved between 12 different homes. He stayed with his parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, and family friends. This constant moving made it impossible for him to feel safe or like he truly belonged anywhere. In 1979, when Kurt was just 12, his mother gave full custody of him to his father. But things didn't go well. In 1980, his father remarried, and Kurt suddenly had a stepmother and 2 step-siblings. He felt like an outsider in his own home. This led to fights, and Kurt started acting out. He became rude to adults and bullied kids at school. His dad sent him to therapy, but when attempts to reunite his parents failed, Kurt felt even more alone. By 1982, Kurt's behavior became too much for his dad to handle. His father started sending him to live with other relatives and even friends. At one point, he stayed with the family of his friend Jesse Reed, who were deeply religious. Kurt briefly turned to Christianity during this time, but later rejected it entirely. This experience later inspired the Nirvana song Lithium, where Kurt imagined a man turning to religion to avoid falling apart. Moving from place to place left Kurt feeling broken. In an interview years later, he admitted that he was ashamed of his family situation. He said he wished for a normal family with both a mom and dad together, and he resented his parents for not giving him that. High school wasn't any better for Kurt. He went to Aberdeen High School in a small, rough logging town. He was artistic and sensitive, which made him stand out in a bad way. Classmates bullied him constantly. They called him names like faggot and queer, especially after he became friends with an openly gay student. But Kurt didn't care. He even leaned into the rumors, saying he was proud to be seen as gay, even though he wasn't. He thought it was better if people left him alone. The bullying didn't stop there. One time, a group of boys beat him up and humiliated him in a terrible way. These experiences left scars that stayed with him for the rest of his life. Kurt also clashed with his dad over sports. His dad wanted him to wrestle and play baseball, but Kurt hated it. He would intentionally lose matches or strike out just to annoy his father. Feeling isolated, Kurt started acting out in small but bold ways. He spray-painted phrases like, "God is gay," on trucks, and even got arrested for writing graffiti on a wall. Schoolwork didn't interest him much, except for art class. His drawings were dark and intense, showing the inner struggles he was dealing with. By the time his senior year came around in 1985, Kurt completely stopped caring about school. When he realized he didn't have enough credits to graduate, he dropped out. Things got even harder after that. His mother kicked him out of the house, saying he had to get a job or leave. When he didn't find work, she packed up his stuff and told him to go. Kurt spent the next few years bouncing between couches, sometimes sneaking back into his mom's basement when he had nowhere else to stay. There's a famous story that Kurt lived under a bridge by the Wishkah River, which inspired his song, Something in the Way. But friends later said this wasn't entirely true. He spent time there, but didn't live there for long. During this rough time, Kurt worked odd jobs, like cleaning his old high school as a janitor or working at a resort in Ocean Shores. He barely made enough to scrape by, but these struggles deeply shaped his music. In 1984, Kurt's life changed when he discovered punk rock. His friend Buzz Osborne from the Melvins gave him tapes of bands like Black Flag and the Sex Pistols. From the moment he listened, Kurt felt like he'd found his purpose. Punk rock wasn't just music to him. It spoke to his anger and frustration with the world. Inspired, he cut his hair, changed his style, and started experimenting with his guitar, trying to copy the fast, loud sound he loved. On May 7, 1985, Kurt Cobain met Krist Novoselic at a local band's practice space. Kurt really wanted to start a band and spent months convincing Krist to join him. He gave Krist a tape of his music project called Fecal Matter. One song, Spank Through, caught Krist's attention, and by December 1987, they finally formed a band together. They named it Nirvana. But the beginning wasn't easy. They couldn't keep a drummer. In just 3 years, 5 drummers came and went. It felt like things might fall apart before they even got started. Then, in 1988, Chad Channing joined, and the band found some stability. Around this time, they started using the name Nirvana, but even that wasn't certain at first. Their first concert as Nirvana was in Tacoma, Washington, on March 19, 1988. Kurt made the flyer himself, listing their old names like Skid Row, Ted Ed Fred, and Pen Cap Chew. Soon after, another band called Nirvana sued them over the name. They settled the fight quietly and kept the name, which would soon become famous. When they made their first album, Bleach, the struggle continued. They didn't have much money, so a guitarist named Jason Everman paid $606.17 to cover the recording costs. Jason didn't play a single note on the album, but they credited him anyway to make him feel included. The recording sessions were tough. They worked on Christmas Eve in 1988 and then spent 3 exhausting days in the studio, finishing in January 1989. The album came out in June, but it didn't sell much, only about 40,000 copies. Nobody outside the underground music scene really noticed it, but someone important did. Kim Gordon from Sonic Youth loved their music and told people about them. Because of her, Nirvana got a deal with DGC Records in 1990. Some fans in Seattle accused them of selling out, but Kurt and Krist felt it was their chance to reach more people without giving up their music. Kurt was inspired by a band called the Pixies. He loved how they made quiet music that suddenly turned loud and raw. When Kurt and Krist wrote Smells Like Teen Spirit, Kurt laughed and said it sounded so much like the Pixies that people would call them out for it. The Pixies' singer, Black Francis, even joked that Nirvana had copied their style, but he wasn't upset about it. Kurt admired how the Pixies mixed soft, catchy melodies with aggressive sounds, and that mix became a big part of Nirvana's music. When Nirvana signed with DGC Records, it felt like a big break. They got $287,000 for 2 albums. Each band member received around $95,000, but after paying managers and other fees, it wasn't as much as it seemed. To make things easier, Kurt set up another deal where they'd each get $1,000 every month. Even with this money, Kurt worried about being called a sellout. He hated the idea of losing the respect of their original fans. In 1991, Kurt Cobain's life changed forever when Nirvana released their second album, Nevermind. Nobody thought it would become so big. At first, the record label expected it to sell about 250,000 copies, but everything changed when the song "Smells Like Teen Spirit" came out. The music video, showing a wild high school pep rally, was played on MTV all the time. Suddenly, everyone knew Nirvana. The song became a huge hit, reaching number 6 on the Billboard charts, which was a big deal for a rock song back then. By January 1992, only 4 months after the album was released, it had sold millions of copies and even beat Michael Jackson's Dangerous for the top spot. Kurt himself was surprised by how fast it all happened. He once said he felt like he needed a class on how to be a rock star because it was so overwhelming. The name "Smells Like Teen Spirit" came from a joke. Kurt's friend, Kathleen Hanna, a singer, spray-painted "Kurt smells like teen spirit" on his wall. She was talking about a deodorant his girlfriend used, but Kurt didn't know that. He thought it sounded deep and used it as the title of the song. The song became a symbol for an entire generation. Nirvana's success didn't just make them famous. It completely changed music. Before Nevermind, grunge was a small thing, mostly in Seattle. But after Nirvana's breakthrough, grunge became the biggest thing in music. The flashy hair metal bands of the 1980s were no longer popular. Grunge bands like Pearl Jam, Soundgarden, and Alice in Chains started getting signed by major record labels. Even MTV, which used to show glossy pop videos, started focusing on grunge. The style of grunge also became a trend. Musicians in Seattle wore thrift store clothes like flannel shirts and ripped jeans because it was cheap. But suddenly, this look became fashionable. High-end designers even started copying it, which was ironic because grunge was never about fashion. For Kurt, all this fame was hard to handle. People called him the voice of a generation, but he hated that label. He didn't want to represent anyone. He just wanted to make music. The pressure made him uncomfortable, and he often rebelled against the music industry. Once, on a British TV show, the band had to pretend to play their song, but Kurt made fun of it by singing in a silly, deep voice and acting over the top. It was his way of mocking the fake nature of fame. Kurt also struggled to keep his music honest. After Nevermind became such a big hit, people expected Nirvana to make more songs like it, but Kurt wanted to go back to their punk roots. When they recorded their next album, In Utero, he made sure it sounded raw and unpolished. The record label didn't like it at first, and even refused to release it until some songs were remixed. Kurt didn't care about making hits. He cared about staying true to his vision. This fight against being too commercial showed up again during Nirvana's MTV Unplugged performance. Instead of playing their biggest hits like "Smells Like Teen Spirit," Kurt chose lesser-known songs and even covered songs by other bands. MTV wasn't happy about it, but Kurt stood his ground. The performance became one of the most famous live shows ever and showed how much he valued his artistic freedom. Even though Nevermind made Nirvana incredibly successful, Kurt felt uneasy about it. He once said he was embarrassed by how polished it sounded and even compared it to the kind of music he used to dislike. This is why In Utero sounded so different. Kurt wanted to push back against the fame and keep his music real, but the pressure, the expectations, and his own struggles with fame made it hard for him to enjoy his success. This inner conflict stayed with him throughout his career. Meanwhile, Kurt Cobain and Courtney Love had a love story full of highs and lows. They got married on February 24, 1992, in a small ceremony on Waikiki Beach in Honolulu, Hawaii. Only 8 people attended, including Nirvana drummer Dave Grohl. It was far from a traditional wedding. Kurt wore green flannel pajamas, and Courtney wore a vintage dress that had once belonged to actress Frances Farmer. Their choice of attire was unusual, and it even inspired the name of Nirvana's song, "Frances Farmer Will Have Her Revenge on Seattle." Later that same year, they welcomed their daughter, Frances Bean Cobain, on August 18th at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles. Kurt came up with her middle name, Bean, because her sonogram reminded him of a kidney bean. Their relationship was intense and began with controversy. Some stories say they first met at a Portland concert in 1989, while others claim it happened in 1990 at a nightclub. A close friend, Everett True, insisted he introduced them in 1991. No matter when they met, their connection was strong. They bonded over music, art, and sadly, drug use, which became a big part of their lives together. Not long after Frances was born, their happiness was shaken by a major scandal. A Vanity Fair article in September 1992 claimed Courtney used heroin while pregnant. This caused a media frenzy, and people started questioning their ability to be good parents. Courtney denied the claim, saying she had been misquoted and stopped using drugs as soon as she found out she was pregnant. Despite her denial, the Los Angeles Department of Children and Family Services investigated. Frances was taken from them for 2 weeks, making the situation even harder for the couple. Years later, in the 2015 documentary Montage of Heck, Courtney admitted she had used heroin in the first 3 weeks of her pregnancy, but didn't know she was pregnant at the time. This confession reignited public debates about addiction and parenting. Kurt and Courtney's relationship was constantly under the media spotlight. Many saw them as a modern-day Sid and Nancy, a couple caught in a spiral of addiction and chaos. Their struggles with fame, mental health, and substance abuse made them frequent tabloid targets. Courtney often faced harsh criticism, with many blaming her for Kurt's troubles. A 1992 Vanity Fair article called her a train wreck and implied she was using Kurt to boost her own career. This portrayal stuck, even after Kurt's death in 1994, with some fans holding her responsible for his death. Despite the backlash, Kurt defended Courtney. In a touching moment, he once told a young fan he appreciated their kind words about her. One of the most tragic incidents in their relationship happened on March 3, 1994, when Kurt overdosed in Rome. Initially, the overdose was reported as accidental, but years later, Courtney revealed it was the attempt triggered by her briefly considering an affair. She said Kurt must have sensed something was wrong, even though nothing ever happened. This incident added another layer of pain and complexity to their already turbulent lives. Though their relationship seemed chaotic from the outside, private footage from Montage of Heck showed another side of their life. Home videos revealed moments of love, humor, and genuine affection between them, showing a softer, more human side to their relationship. These glimpses made it clear that their story wasn't as simple as the media often portrayed. Kurt Cobain's struggles began with a constant pain that never seemed to go away. In the late 1980s, he started having severe stomach pain caused by a pinched nerve related to scoliosis. The pain was intense and never-ending, making it hard for him to focus on anything else. As the years went by, the pain took a toll on both his body and his mind. By 1993, after trying many treatments that didn't work, Cobain turned to heroin to deal with it. For him, it wasn't about getting high. It was about finding relief from pain that felt impossible to escape. He talked about how heroin made the unbearable pain go away, even if just for a little while. Cobain's addiction grew as the pain stayed with him. During Nirvana's tours, it became clear to those around him that he was struggling. In 1991, while on a European tour, his pain was so bad, he felt like he couldn't keep going. Heroin became his way to keep moving, even though it created new problems for him. While Nirvana became one of the biggest bands in the world after Nevermind, Cobain felt trapped. The fame didn't make him happy, it only added pressure. His constant touring left no time for proper medical care, and even the medications he tried didn't help much. He kept going back to heroin, caught in a cycle of pain and dependency. Cobain's mental health made things even harder. From an early age, he dealt with emotional struggles. As a child, he was diagnosed with ADD, and later, he was told he had bipolar disorder. This meant his mood would swing between high energy and deep sadness. People close to him saw these shifts. Sometimes, he was warm and engaging. Other times, he was distant and upset. His music reflected these feelings. Songs like Lithium captured the highs and lows he experienced. Even though his music allowed him to express his inner battles, Cobain was hesitant to seek help. He worried that treatment or medication might dull his creativity, something he valued deeply. At the time, there was also a lot of stigma around mental health, which made asking for help even harder. As the years went by, Cobain became more overwhelmed. The pressure of fame, his ongoing pain, and his emotional struggles all built up. Friends noticed how much he was struggling, and his dependency on heroin made everything worse. Many people with bipolar disorder turn to drugs or alcohol to cope with their feelings, and Cobain was no exception. Despite the success of his music, he often talked about feeling lost and unable to keep up with everything expected of him. In the weeks leading up to April 1994, people close to Cobain tried to help him. After a serious overdose in Rome, which many believed was not accidental, his wife Courtney Love and his friends worked together to stage an intervention. On March 25th, they all gathered at his Seattle home to talk to him about what was happening. It was an emotional meeting that lasted hours. At first, Cobain resisted, but eventually he agreed to go to a detox program. However, when it came time to leave for treatment, he changed his mind at the last moment and refused to go, but eventually went for after some thinking. On April 1st, 1994, Kurt Cobain made a decision that would change everything. He left the Exodus Recovery Center in Los Angeles, where he had checked in just 36 hours earlier for treatment. At around 7:25 p.m., he climbed over a 6-foot wall and managed to avoid being seen by anyone. Dressed in a red and black striped sweater and ripped jeans, he left without telling anyone where he was going. Cobain then took a taxi to the Los Angeles airport and boarded a flight to Seattle, using the name Bill Bailey. When Cobain arrived in Seattle, he didn't go straight home. He spent the next few days moving between different locations, including the home of his friend Dylan Carlson. During this time, his actions raised concern. On April 2nd, he went to a gun shop in Seattle and bought some shotgun shells. The taxi driver who took him there later recalled that Cobain mentioned needing the shells because his house had been broken into. Over the next few days, several people saw him in Seattle, but he kept to himself and seemed distant. On April 3rd, his mother, Wendy O'Connor, reported him missing, saying she was worried for his safety. Courtney Love, his wife, also hired a private investigator, Tom Grant, to help locate him. Meanwhile, Cobain quietly returned to his home on Lake Washington Boulevard, where he spent his final days. On April 8, 1994, an electrician named Gary Smith arrived at Cobain's house to install a security system. At around 8:40 a.m., while working near the garage, he looked into the window of a small greenhouse above it and saw something that caught his attention. At first, he thought it was a mannequin, but as he looked closer, he realized it was Cobain. Smith immediately alerted the authorities, and police arrived soon after. Cobain's body was found inside the greenhouse with a shotgun nearby. A note was discovered near him, addressed to his imaginary childhood friend, Boda. In it, Cobain expressed feelings of exhaustion and a loss of passion for creating music. He wrote, "I haven't felt the excitement of listening to as well as creating music, along with really writing, for too many years now." A medical report later confirmed that Cobain had passed away a few days earlier, on April 5, 1994. The report also revealed that his system contained high levels of substances that could have impacted his mental and physical state at the time. This marked the end of a significant chapter in music history. The news of Cobain's passing sent shockwaves through the music world and beyond. On April 10th, a public vigil was held at the Seattle Center, drawing thousands of fans. People came together to grieve, share memories, and play Nirvana's music. Courtney Love attended the vigil and read parts of the note to the crowd, offering a glimpse into Cobain's thoughts during his final days. The event showed how deeply he had touched the lives of fans around the world. Cobain's passing also brought an end to the grunge era that had defined music in the early 1990s. Bands like Pearl Jam canceled tours as they processed the loss of one of their peers. Cobain's struggles highlighted the pressures of fame and the challenges faced by artists in the music industry, sparking important conversations about mental health and substance use. Frances Bean Cobain paid a heartfelt tribute to her father, Kurt Cobain, on April 5, 2024, the 30th anniversary of his death. She shared an emotional post on Instagram, quoting a letter Kurt wrote to her before she was born. "Wherever you go or wherever I go, I will always be with you." These words, written in 1992, have become a source of comfort for Frances, who was just 20 months old when her father passed away. She also shared rare photos, including 2 from their last moments together. Frances talked about how her grandmother, Wendy Cobain, used to press Frances's hands to her cheeks and say they felt just like Kurt's. This small act became a powerful connection to her father. Frances spoke about the pain of never knowing Kurt personally. She wondered about the little things, how his voice sounded, how he liked his coffee, or what it would feel like to be tucked in by him at bedtime. She imagined them catching tadpoles together during hot summers in Washington, or him smelling of Camel Lights and strawberry Nesquik. Things she had heard were his favorites. Despite the sadness, Frances said grief has taught her important lessons. She wrote, "The biggest lesson learned through grieving for almost as long as I've been conscious is that it serves a purpose." She described how grief, pain, joy, and life are deeply connected, and how those contrasts give life its meaning. As Kurt's only child, Frances inherited his estate, which has been both a blessing and a challenge. In 2017, court records revealed she was earning over $100,000 a month from her father's publicity rights and dividends, totaling $1.2 million a year. However, her monthly expenses were more than $206,000, showing how difficult it can be to manage such wealth. Frances admitted feeling guilt about the inheritance, saying it feels like a loan she could never pay back. She compared it to receiving money from someone she never really got to meet. Over time, she took control of her finances, working with advisors and realizing that living well doesn't have to mean living extravagantly. Frances has also taken on her father's legacy in other ways. She has been open about mental health and addiction, issues that deeply affected Kurt's life. By sharing her own struggles, she helps reduce stigma and encourages others to seek help. She has also been involved in protecting her father's artistic vision. In 2018, she helped oversee the 20th anniversary release of Nirvana's In Utero. Frances worked to balance respecting Kurt's intentions with giving fans something special.